Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Zenitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do try to stream this live over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, and it also is uploaded as a YouTube video under the channel of Zenitsu, on top of being on various podcasting platforms like Spotify for your viewing and listening pleasure. So please feel free to leave that rating, like, follow, subscribe, or whatever, depending on the platform that you're listening on. It really does help support the podcast. Today, I am back with Jay Stewart, and we are going to be talking about Nationals. So, Nationals just happened. We do have Nationals data. We're going to be going over, the bigger picture, probably in a different episode, just because there's so much to talk about with just Nationals alone, on top of spoilers and whatever else is going on. So, I think, with the talk of Nationals, looking at one of the bigger pictures, in terms of topical conversation points, is the conversation of diversity, and continuing that conversation on what diversity actually means, because it seems like everyone has a different opinion. They're all not incorrect, but I think having a better understanding on what we should be defining as diversity really would help progress the conversation on whether the game is actually in a healthy state or not, especially when it comes to these high-level competitive events. So, just to bring up the data that we have, so we do have, thanks to Eggman Events, they were able to get us the data quickly enough. I'm shocked that PlayTCG actually gave it to us this quickly, but we actually have it. So when it comes to the top 16, we do have top 32 data, but most of the time when looking at this data stuff, I just work in top 16s to keep everything equal and consistent. So, but as far as the top 32 archetype breakdown goes, we did have Mirage as the most represented deck in top 32. Then there was 7 of them. Then it was a tie between Purple Hybrid, 7 Great Demon Lord, and 3 Great Angels. All of them had 4 decks each. Then Fen, Levia, Magnamon all had 3 decks each. Then, when it comes to the one-ofs, it was Ancient Grey, Dexdoru, Gora, Imperial, and Rapid. So, not a terrible top 32, but things look, because we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We have 11 different decks that made it into top 32, but, like I said, I like working in top 16s, just because that's where we get the rest of the data is, and to match that to get more of an app comparison, things start looking a little bit different and painting a different picture, considering the top 16 breakdown, as you could kind of see here. We had 2 7 Great Demon Lords, 3 Levias, 4 Purple Hybrids, 2 Fens, 4 Mirages, and 1 Magnamon X. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we literally cut almost half of the whole meta the second we go from top 32 to top 16. And then top 8, we only shave 1 deck off when it comes to that. So not really going to be mentioning that. But yeah, so realistically, we had about 6 decks that actually made it into top 16 that performed somewhat consistently. Obviously, the winner was 7 Great Demon Lords. This match was streamed on top of one of the semi-final matches, which was, I believe, Levia versus something else. There was a lot of Levia on the day 2 stream, but the winner of this event was 7 Great Demon Lords, followed by Levia, then Purple Hybrids, then Fen. So all of top 4 was purple. Each a different purple deck, granted, but still all purple. Then top 8 is when we see a little bit of blue with Mirage, followed by Purple Hybrids, then Mirage, then Levia, And then going into top 16, we just see more purple and blue. Literally, the entire top 16 was nothing but purple and blue. Spoilers. With Leviamon, purple hybrids, 7 Great Demon Lords, Mirage, Magnamon X, Mirage, and Fen. So, yeah. The only really interesting thing to note is each of the purple hybrids was a different variant of purple hybrids. So we had a purple hybrids, like more pure purple hybrid Rush. So they were just trying to reuse and recycle the Velgermon and Duskmon combo. Then the next purple hybrids that did well was the yellow top end. So this is like the yellow toolbox where they do have another level 5, or they're playing like some purple yellow level 5s to be able to digivolve into yellow level 6s. Then when it comes to the next one, which is Purple Hybrids Merva. So this is another more classical build where it's just trying to use all of the broken purple resource generating cards to just spam out a Mervamon and attack with rush bodies. Similarly to the third place one, but third place was not trying to rely on Merva. They were using Guilmon. And then Tyler on the last top 16 Purple Hybrids list. He was on a Dark Masters variant, so he was trying to play harder into the mill aspect. So cool that each of the Purple Hybrids was doing something different, even though Purple Hybrids is still using the same core and engine for a lot of what the deck is trying to do, which is that Duskmon Felger loop using like Matt and obviously Koichi's. So cool on that. Outside of that, literally nothing else has changed anything in terms of deck wise that's worth pointing out. The only deck in here that was representing Lord Nightmon was a Levia deck that also splashed Lord Nightmon, but it was still a Levia deck. It's still using Dog Engine. So Lord Nightmon just hasn't been doing that great into the meta, and I think it's because it just has a harder time, 1, controlling, and 2, finishing games. So that's definitely something noteworthy to think about, is like, oh, it does great into a couple of specific decks, but if we take a look at where the meta has developed and how we got to this position, then we definitely are going to be painting a different image as far as how this ended up the way it did. So, Jay Stewart, do you have the UK data pulled up?
I do not at this current moment. Bear with me just a minute.
Yeah, because part of what I'm kind of relating to is, like, we obviously took note of the European data, and that definitely heavily influenced our choices when it came to what we were playing and where the meta currently is. I mean, like, as a competitive player, we all know exactly where the meta is and what's going to be good. It's just, what representation do we think each will have to where we're going to be putting our attentions and concerns in. And after playing in this event personally, well, Jay Stewart pulls up the European data so we could look at that and have him talk about that for a hot second. The one thing that I did notice in this event more specifically was everyone was either trying to be Mirage or beat Mirage. So that's just where this meta was, and that top 16 breakdown really showcases exactly that. I could talk about my matches, but I'm going to be making a whole YouTube video on that when I can. But yeah, this format definitely was be Mirage or beat Mirage. And right now, the majority of decks and colors like that are literally not blue or purple just have a very hard time doing that because of the level of efficiency Mirage brings to the table when it comes to the game, and what he can do to shut the opponent out from even playing the game. Not saying that there aren't counters to Mirage. I'm just saying we knew he was the boogeyman and we prepped for him more specifically. That's why a lot of like the Levia lists, they were running 3 Gazis and 1 Psych because they figured 7 Great Demon Lords might not be that big of a threat. As we saw in the finals, it shockingly was. Well, not really shockingly, it was, but you can only put in so much tech for one specific matchup, and they took the calculated risk, or like this just goes into deck building in general, and players took the calculated risk on seeing Mirage more than seeing Demon Lords. So, but all right, Jay Stewart's having a hard time finding it, so I'll bring up the data. But when it comes to the European data, um, it was the first place winner was on Mirage, second was on Imperial, third was on Angels, fourth was on Demon Lords, fifth was on Purple Hybrids, six was on Angels, 8 was on Mirage, and or 7 was on Mirage, and 8 was on Mirage. So they also had a very high Mirage count. And that probably alerted us to be like, hey, Mirage is still that good, which is why a lot of players were teching their decks to be able to beat Mirage. And that's why, like, 3 Great Angels was really good into this format. More specifically because people were playing Mirage. I think the deck still has its issues. It's a very strong deck, but it still has its issues. And then when it comes to like just the other representation, it was very identical to like deck wise and diversity wise to what we saw in our top 16. So it was just the majority of the same decks, just reordered and put into some slightly different perspectives. But that's probably why people were playing Angels, and we already knew what the other best decks were. So, do you have the last year's data pulled up, Jay Stewart, at least?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it right now.
I just use Eggman events, and then you could just go to EX5, and then it's under North American Finals. Because the interesting thing is we do have last year's data to kind of like compare and contrast with. I did a Facebook post, or not really a Facebook post, but a comment on the color breakdown for the top 32, and shocker, the majority of it was blue and purple. It was like 15 blue, 11 purple, and then like the rest was like yellow. I think 4 yellow, 1 green, and 1 red, which not very good when it comes to color diversity, but we'll get into diversity and talk about that more when we finish that portion up.
Yeah, so for the Eggman events, he has the 2023 finals listed on top 64. So there's on it, there was 25 Anubis, 8 Mirage, 7 Red Hybrid, 4 Secons, Security Control, 3 Blue Metal Garurumon, 3 Purple Metal Garurumon, 2 Beelzemon, 2 Belfi / Levia, 2 Leos, 2 Machine Dramons, 1 Bargra, 1 Blue Flare, 1 4 Great Sovereigns / Devas, 1 Hunters, 1 Lugamon, and 1 Yellow Vaccine.
Yeah. So, granted, the majority of this was up to top 64, where this time around we only have up to top 32. But, like, again, kind of just looking at the majority of top 16, first place was Anubis and second place was Security Control. I would say that basically Security Control, just anyone who was kind of playing Security Control, either moved to 3 Great Angels or 7 Great Demon Lords, because it's fulfilling the same type of role, just a slightly different deck. So, knowing that that was the case, the finals for this year were almost identical to last year, where instead of Anubis it was Leviamon, but the Leviamon deck I know for a fact was running the Anubis, and the Anubis did come up. Um, and that, yeah, and it just goes to show that even a year ago, the meta has actually barely progressed and developed. Like, I mean, granted, yes, Security Control is a completely different deck than Demon Lords, but again, same role. Mirage was still present. Red Hybrids was still present. Lugamon was still present. The only like real big difference was we didn't really have Belphamon, but we could probably just say that was just lumped into Leviamon because yeah, dog package. Um, and then we still had yellow vaccines. And the only like real outlier was the Metal Garurumons. Like that was pretty much it.
And
So,
probably Leomon too for the 2023.
Leomon was
Or Bargramon was technically the biggest swing, because I remember Bargramon actually made top 32, and that kind of just stumped everyone at that point.
yeah. So, but I mean, there's always gonna be like those weird outliers. Like Machine Dramon also made it in, but like, um, when it comes to like overall representation, that Nats was basically play Anubis or beat or play something to beat Anubis, except everything had a harder time beating Anubis. Where I guess like this time around, you could beat Mirage, but you have to build and tech your deck to specifically beat it. And then the problem is if you don't see Mirage and you see like other decks, it's hard to tech for everything. So it's like, okay, I tech against Mirage and then I lose to 7 Great Demon Lords. But am I more afraid of 7 Great Demon Lords than Mirage? That's like the real meta call. And that's basically kind of just what happened, where it's just like, yes, if the Anubis player or the Leviamon player um, teched more against Demon Lords, then he's making himself weaker to Mirage. And I know that that Levia player who got in second did see Mirages. So like they saw Mirages more than they saw 7 Great Demon Lords. So their tech was correct. It just backfired when they saw the incorrect deck, which goes into like lots of weird tournament statistics that I'm not remotely good at. But all of this is kind of bringing the conversation up because I saw it being talked about a lot on what is diversity. Because if you ask some people, they'll say this format is incredibly diverse. And if you ask other people, they'll say it's not very diverse. So that kind of got me like re-evaluating and reassessing what actually diversity means. So I guess, Jay Stewart, what do you think diversity means to you? And then I'll go over my definition, and then we can kind of evaluate from there.
Yeah, so to me, diversity is kind of a little bit of a weird uh thing, because it is like quite complex just due to my experience from Yu-Gi-Oh. But if I was to solely base it on Yu-Gi-Oh, I would just go by overall like the cards in the deck. Like for example, I think there was shoot, I'm trying to think Dragon Links or something like that. There was like, you know, there was quite a bit of decks that would use the Dragon Links package, and then they would like mix match a couple different cards, but it was still considered Dragon Links. And then you had something like, I don't know, like Light Sworns, where it's like it's not using those cards at all, so therefore it's a completely different deck and everything. Because I know we were kind of talking about it in this meta. You know, you had Leviamon and Lord Nightmon that kind of are using the same engine but just different top end. And we had decks like Mirage, like pure Mirage, Fish Engine Mirage, and then Galaxy Engine, where they're using the same top end, but a lot of the cards at the bottom end are different. But it's trying to achieve the top end the best. And there was like another deck we mentioned too that was like almost purely the same.
Well, I mean, Dexter Goramon does something similar where it's just like, are they using Lugamon's package or are they using their package? And it's like, that's the difference between purple and black base, is like, how is it basically achieving the top end? And I think like Digimon and Yu-Gi-Oh are kind of similar in that aspect, where it's just like we started developing engines, but are they actually different decks if they're using the same exact engine? So I know like the Yu-Gi-Oh answer is, oh, well, you just say the engine and the boss monster. So it's just like, yeah, this is Dogmatica whatever. Um so like I know,
Danger Thunders.
yeah, Danger Thunders or Danger whatever. So like they just started fusing engine to boss monster, or like the two different archetypes into their naming convention to kind of like signal that maybe we need to do the same thing, but I think there's not enough engines for us to really warrant doing that, because most decks are trying to be their own thing. It's just some engines got so powerful and hyper generic that they kind of dominated specific decks. So, um, but yeah, I think like engine versus boss monster is definitely a very interesting one to define diversity, because like in that example with again Levia and Lord Knight, like would you define them as two different decks, like realistically?
To me, I would kind of consider them two different decks because yes, the base engine package is the same, but the top end is achieving two different outcomes. Like with the Leviathan is trying to control, while the Lore Knight is trying to be hard, aggressive, spamming, and multi-attacking kind of thing that it's trying to achieve. So it's like they're trying to achieve different things, but they're using the same engine, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you would define diversity more by boss monsters.
Yeah, that would be fair, yeah.
Okay. So my definition of diversity, um, I am about playstyles. So like to me, seeing the last time I reported on top eight, which the top eight really hasn't changed a whole lot, but like just taking a look at some of the better decks of this format, you have Ancient Greymon, you have Takumi Kazuchi, you have Mirage. All three of these decks are OTK decks. So, like, they all essentially are accomplishing almost the exact same thing. Sure, they're doing slightly different things to accomplish the end goal, but the fact that the end goal is exactly the same, to me, is just it's all OTKs. So I literally just see these as this same exact deck, just pick your flavor or color of choice. So that's partially how I define diversity, is like, what are these decks actually doing different from one another? Because like the majority of the same, like because they're falling into the same type of category, they have the same type of weaknesses, where it's just like, oh, a stray security bomb against any of these OTK decks, they do kind of just almost automatically lose the game, unless like that's the very last security and they have another way to like make up that damage somewhere. So like some are a little bit more resilient than others when it comes to that type of analogy. But they like an early security bomb check does just straight up brick all of them. Or like a very well timed ace, if the OTK deck can't get rid of the Digimon, that could really mess things up. Like they do just all still have the same type of weaknesses. Then you have like Leviamon is a more control deck. I guess it's kind of like mid-rangey because it can control and it can aggro. Most of the time, it's just trying to control. But Seven Great Demon Lords, like going back to this year's finals being similar to last year's finals, um, like it basically was Purple Degenerate versus, um, hyper control. Um, so like that's what happened last year, and that's exactly what happened this year. So it really kind of just paints this picture where the game, in my perspective, based on my definition of diversity, hasn't really changed and has only gotten worse because things have gotten less interactive. Because you look at Seven Great Demon Lords, it's like, okay, can you reasonably deal with a level 6 body every single turn? No. Can you honestly stop the gate from doing its thing? Barely. So there's literally just almost nothing you could do, and then there's tons of cards inside of Seven Great Demon Lords that you literally can't do anything about. Like Lucimon being probably the biggest and most egregious example. Then you have purple hybrids, where it's like, oh, purple hybrids, I'm just gonna sit on tamers. How many decks have tamer interaction? Not a lot.
Very few.
So, the fact that like between ancient or like purple hybrids, blue hybrids, and red hybrids, they all basically do the exact same thing. Where it's just like, cool, I'm going to use my tamer, digivolve up into a Digimon, have it delete itself, reset the tamer, and then continue to do the same thing over and over again. Meanwhile, I'm not giving you anything on the field to really interact or respond with. So like that's where in my perspective, like yes, the hybrid decks are doing something different, but they're following very similar gameplay patterns on trying to reduce the amount of interaction possible. Then you have the OTK decks where they sit in their raising area, move out, and then boom, they explode and kill you, ideally. So like it's just, to me, the game has only gotten worse and less interactive. But like yes, all of the same strategies are still there. It's just the quantity of the strategies and how we could deal and handle the strategies. That's the big thing. At least in my perspective of diversity, because some people like literally just strictly look at how many different decks total and just be like, "Yep, that's diversity." And it's just like, "Yeah, cool. We have 8 decks total, but my counter argument to that is when we've only had the same 8 decks total, is that actually really diversity? Like, because ideally you want some fluctuation with that to increase the amount of decks playable, because by that definition, the more decks playable, the more diverse the format is. But if I've already talked about this ad nauseum, where based on the data that we have, the format is technically only shrunken, and we've had the same 8 decks topping over and over again. And because these are the same 8 decks that we've seen for over the past year, and people know that these decks are good, like that's why we've seen the reduction in other decks being played or playable, is because one, nothing can really match their power level, and two, as these decks are known, people are going to be playing what is good. It is just the natural thing of things where somebody sees somebody top with a really good deck and now they want that same level of success. So they'll take note of that and either A, try to formulate counter plans, or B, play the top deck. That's just a natural thing. So like this all goes into what diversity actually kind of is and means, and everyone has their own different interpretation, is what I've kind of learned, just reading and talking and trying to figure out a good answer on not necessarily unifying what diversity means, because it's all just hyperbole and opinion based, but trying to get a better understanding and a better lockdown on how to actually define whether the game is in a healthy spot or not.
Yeah, because I know another thing too was last week's podcast. I was trying to be a little more interactive with the comments, and the person I'm trying to see here. Oreo X, I kind of replied to him and I mentioned like, the whole different aspects that you were kind of saying. The number representation, the play style of the decks, but there's even colors getting represented as well as being another type of diverse meta. Because if we were to compare last year's, there's purple, blue, red, multicolor for a couple of them, a green black one for the Leomon, uh,
Yellow.
hunters, yellow. Like there's like I'm already listing off some colors that you might have heard. Like green is like, well, green wasn't in this year at whatsoever. Black wasn't really in this one whatsoever either. So it's like kind of the whole aspect of just another type of diversity are we referring to?
Yeah, because colors generally dictates gameplay styles. So like that generally goes into the like different strategies. So it's just like purple as an example is more trash based. I mean, granted, because of scrambles, everything's basically trash based, and the trash is a huge problem. But that's different story for a different time. But yeah, overall color representation kind of shows off the different mechanics in play in the game. And yes, because two colors, you can say that there is representation of a color because of the two color aspect. Like in this top 32 for nationals, technically there was no black decks, but Dexter Rogora is part black. So was black really represented? The only green deck, like real green deck, was Rapidmon. But Imperial is part green and has some green cards, so is green really represented? Like it's more of those ambiguous aspects of like defining diversity, but like going from a pure color standpoint, um yeah, the game has been polarized more towards blue and purple, and it's kind of always been that way, but not necessarily this bad. Because you look at Nats last year, and yes, it was still the majority of it was blue and purple. But if you look at Nats last year, or like not last year, 2 years ago, back in like BT11 format, it was red, black, and green. To be honest, like there was a little bit of blue and a little bit of purple, but it because of where that meta was, being mostly focused on Black War Greymon being the boogeyman and Black War Greymon being a black and red Digimon, really highlighted that a different color was existing in the top echelons of the meta, and as a result, Grandis was still doing good. Granted, Grandis was doing good since its release in BT9, but in that Nationals format, Grandis was still a very good deck. Um, then you had like Mirage was still kind of there. I remember Ulforce doing well in that event as well, but that's a blue deck. But like the point that I'm trying to get at is at least there was some different color diversity when it comes to what's being able to top because of where the mechanics of the game currently are. And right now, the mechanics of the game are currently heavily favored into blue and purple. Um, and I think that's a little bit unfortunate that a lot of the other colors and therefore a lot of the other decks are falling by the wayside. But like, yes, some people will make the argument there was there was four different purple decks. No, there was five different purple. No, there was four. Purple Hybrid, Seven Great Demon Lords, Fen, and Levia. So yeah, four. Technically five with decks, but decks didn't make it into top 16. So you can make the argument like, yes, you had four different purple decks that were playable in this format, but and granted, all of those decks are kind of doing some different things because you have Fen being the OTK deck, Purple Hybrids being more of the aggro deck, Seven Great Demon Lords being the control deck, and Levia kind of being that like mid-range control. But kind of the thing that we're getting at here is we don't really have a solid, like we as a community don't really have a solid definition of diversity. And I think like this comes to cards more specifically than decks when it comes to defining if the format is healthy or not. I think like that's the conclusion that I'm coming to. Um, what do you think about that, Jay Stewart? Because like I know talking about individual cards is a lot harder for a lot of people to do. Like, granted, right now everyone's talking about the ban restriction list and everyone's talking about individual cards. But, like, that's partially why I think, like, certain cards are just that much more powerful than anything else in the entire game. And those individual cards are helping propel specific decks to be successful.
Yeah, no, and I do think that is fair because I mean, because uh, I hate keeping bringing up Yu-Gi-Oh, but that is where my background of TCG is. Because with Yu-Gi-Oh, literally, it's a one card engine when I was quitting the game. Like, you just needed to draw your one card that you had. If you did, that one card turned the rest of the engine on. And if you didn't see it, then you just needed to try to stall your opponent out by stopping them from trying to do their one card engine. But, I mean, when it comes to Digimon, it's like, I mean, it's not as bad as Yu-Gi-Oh, obviously, but at the same time, though, it still kind of can be, and at points, sometimes it does feel like it does get as frustrating as Yu-Gi-Oh, because, Yu-Gi-Oh, I'm kind of familiar with the whole idea of, oh, there's only three decks that are meta. There's the actual meta deck, the anti-meta, and then this really dumb rogue deck that nobody thought was going to be making an appearance. So really, you can almost argue that it's only two decks, really. And I know sometimes, with Yu-Gi-Oh, it kind of gets a little bit of, well, it's only two decks that are meta because of the whole side deck situation. But besides that, if you just look at the basic fact of it's only two decks that get represented, and when Digimon came around, it was pulling a bunch of players from different TCGs. You had people from Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, like myself, Pokemon, possibly Vanguard, I would say. I can't say for sure. But
No, definitely Vanguard because people will say like I'm gonna ride this or I'm gonna promote. Like those are all like more Vanguardy terms.
yeah. And, obviously different players from different card games have their own perception of what exactly is diversity, which is why this whole even topic of all these different types of diversities you could be referring to color, deck styles, top end, bottom engine, all that kind of stuff. It's like even just like up in the air right now of what is considered diversity for Digimon because it's easy to identify with other TCGs, but it's a little bit harder for Digimon, I think, is the problem just because we're all from different TCG backgrounds and it's just we have our own thought process that we're used to.
Yeah, well, Digimon's deck design, like the way they want you to build decks, usually is pretty linear, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. But this is like one of the first times where it's actually getting non-linear because of the different engines and like I this is going to sound really bad. Poor game design and balance that has been going on in the past year and a half really opening things up in the most unhealthiest of ways. So like just kind of as an example, I think Biting Crush, like looking back at it, is an incredibly dumb card, and that is seen in both Seven Great Demon Lords and Three Great Angel, or not Three Great Angels, Leviamon. I don't know why I was thinking Three Great Angels. I think I was thinking Patamon for like the Three Great Angels example, where it's just like, yeah, that card's just way too open to like be abused by various different things, and the fact that like the Saya and Co tamer can like all you need is just a Nightclaw or Light Fang. It doesn't even have to be the one that you're digivolving into. Just the fact that one exists is enough for the card to be broken wide open, um, based on how poorly designed that card actually is. Because like during my nationals run, like somebody had an extra rookie that they digivolved for free into a level 4, like Nightclaw and Night Fang, And then they used the Tamer to digivolve their main stack, which was a level 5 at the time, because they split out with the Honkun to get that secondary stack. They used that new level 4 to then digivolve into a level 6 for free. So I think like that's kind of problematic um in that regards, and like that's why like certain deck design elements have been opening up, which people have been loving because it allows for more creativity, but um it also allows for more degenerate things to happen, more than what would have been anticipated or planned for, because of the fact that Digimon really wants to like railroad its players into more specific playstyles when it comes to how this deck is supposed to operate. So they have their pros and they have their cons. Um and like it's this shift that is shifting our paradigms on what we define as diversity, on top of like, yes, coming from various different TCGs, everyone having their own definition based on the old TCG, because like, oh, if I'm coming from Vanguard, the world I was playing, that's where I define diversity, is the worlds. Magic, it could be colors, it could be deck style. And by deck style I mean like combo cards. So like Splinter Twins is a deck because it runs Splinter Twins. So just that's just an example of that. Or you could just say like Demir Control, where it's just like, yeah, this is just black red control. Or not black red. Black blue control. Black red is Rakdos, and that's usually a more aggressive strategy. But like that, those are all different definitions based on the different games. Pokemon's completely different also, because Pokemon talks about like what's the main boss monster of the deck. It's like, oh, or like boss monsters. It's talking about the mons inside of the deck, where it's like, oh yeah, this is just Charizard Pidgeot, just as an example. So like there's no real anything to it. It's just that's just how they define their decks, and thus how they partially define their diversity. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we just need a new way to reevaluate how to define diversity, because I think
Because
there's a lot of different factors in play.
yeah, I think what because kind of how the Eggman and them already set it up. They said it. I don't know. It's like kind of a mix of. I think it's just mostly like what the boss monster is, or what the win con of the deck is. So like maybe that's what we should be trying to get used to. But it just
I think
at
I'm
times
in
feels like
that.
it's other factors
Yeah, I
that
think
I
I'm
feel like
kind
should
of
be.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in that type of mentality. But like then again, we get into like really weird territories where it's just like, okay, if we're going to be labeling Mirage and Galaxy as the same deck because Galaxy uses Mirage as a top end, like how do we explain something like Purple Hybrids? Because now would we say this is a Merva deck? Or would we say this is a Venusmon deck or a Sandrill deck? Or would we say this is an Apocalypse deck? Like, we literally just had like 4 different variants of Purple Hybrids top, but it's all the same. Like, literally, because of the engine, it is all the same. It plays exactly the same. It just has a couple of different small little techs to try to diversify itself. And like this is something I've seen kind of change on like eggmanevents.com, is like they're having a hard time defining how to label decks, because are we going off of boss monster? Are we going off of engine? Are we going off of individual cards? Like it starts to become very difficult on how we actually are defining decks.
Yeah, because you can even take a look at Magnamon X like earlier before, because I'm pretty sure the it was like we were seeing like obviously how I think what was his name, Dan was like starting to really popularize the idea of armor DNA Magnamon X. And I think every once in a while you saw in the Eggman events where Magnamon X was considered a Imperialmon deck, or even Magnamon X would be in with like all the other blue armors, or even and the one maybe two of yellow armor vaccine that was still kicking around, and you would just see like the whole Imperial DNA stuff mixed in with like grouped into the Magna X as well.
Yeah, so like it makes our perception, like, because of this, it kind of, like we've been saying, just makes our perception of diversity very skewed, and like everyone has their own different interpretation. No one can agree on anything. And I think like that's part of the problem is we need to find a good way to like bring home what a deck actually is. It was easier before when it was more archetype locked, where it's just like, yeah, this is a Black War Greymon deck, or this is a Metal Garurumon deck. Even then, because of the different colors, we also then had to specify where it's just like, okay, this is purple, this is blue, but they were using the same type of cards. So it's just like, it started getting really muddled and confused after a while, and that issue has never really gone away. I felt like it kind of started. It actually kind of started around BT11. Now that I think about it, because that's when we had like, oh, this is a Black War Greymon. No, it started around BT12 actually, because we had Black War Greymon, and then we had War
Red,
Greymon.
Black, War Greymon.
Yes. So like, is it a Black War Greymon deck? Or is it a War Greymon deck? And I think that's kind of where the issue might have stemmed from, because Black War Grey sometimes used War Grey, but now does that make it a War Grey deck? I know this is all just hyperbole, but this is just like giving the roots to, like, trying to find the roots to the problem to see and try to see how we could potentially solve it. So, like, I
Yeah,
think maybe we do have to take the Yu-Gi-Oh! Naming convention approach. Like, as awful as it is, the fact that we have to make all of these comparisons to Yu-Gi-Oh! Because the game is slowly becoming more like Yu-Gi-Oh! And not necessarily for the best of reasons, we probably do need to say engine dot boss monster. Like, that honestly seems like the best way to be able to fully define what a deck is, because the engine, like in Yu-Gi-Oh, the engine does make up at least 70% of the deck. It's the same way in Dragon Ball Masters, and it's the same way in a lot of other decks that uses like actual engines to facilitate a gameplay strategy to get to a specific outcome. And it's just whatever boss monster can pair best with that engine that they could achieve to actually have its win con be met. So I think like we do need to just start saying like, hey, this is like we kind of started to, but I think like we need to push that transition to do that a little bit more.
yeah, because even when 2.0 first came out, I mean, I know I was like telling my people at locals, it's like, oh, I want to play Lord Nymon X, but not the Cerberus package. I want to play the Dark Knight package instead, because I feel like that's what the designers originally wanted it to be. So I want to give it a shot of that. It's not overcomplicated, but it should still relatively be good.
Uh Against specific things it's really not good, but that's partially why nobody plays it.
Yeah, and the whole Lord Nymon X is like just because no one plays the Lord Nightmon X Dark Knight package, it's just you don't need to worry about saying Lord Nightmon Cerberus package or anything like that, because that's the only one that's really ever been popularized.
Right, but like when we get to like, hey, what is the actual difference between Lord Nightmon and Levia? When sometimes Levia uses Lord Nightmon or vice versa, it's like, okay, so it's dog package dot Levia and dog package dot Lord Knight. Like we kind of do have to specify that dog package is in there, because if I just say Lord Knight, somebody who built it black based first, or Dark Knight Lord Knight, because that's actually its own engine, is the Dark Knight stuff. Lord Knight doesn't really have an engine of its own per se. Then, uh, so like it's all kinds of weird, and I think like we as a community need to find a better way of not only just naming our decks, but figuring out what the heck we want to define as diversity, because like the way I've defined diversity has in part been deck count and then gameplay strategies, which is why I find this format to be one of the least diverse, is because we went from having in BT15 like 30 plus playable decks that all have made top 16 in somewhat large events and a decent number of large events. So like that to me shows that the rock paper scissors aspect was really wide, like really wide. It was wider than rock paper scissors lizard Spock. It like had 3 more degrees to that added to it to really make it diverse, because right now we could see that yes, boogeyman decks like and boogeyman formats, generally there's always going to be a decrease in diversity, because what can it's basically play the boogeyman or play something that can beat the boogeyman. It's very binary. Versus where it's just like, okay, I have Numemon. Numemon gets countered by red hybrids. Red hybrids gets countered by Devas. Devas gets countered by something else that gets countered by something else, but Numemon counters all the way, loops around to that, creating that more intricate web of like deck matchups. And I think like that's in part how we can get certain formats to be as wide and diverse as they are. So hearing like, oh, this meta is diverse, when I've literally done nothing but see it shrink, it always makes me scratch my head on like, what are they looking at, or what perception they're under to come to that type of result.
Yeah, or even the whole mindset of diverse, because if they are in the whole idea of number percentage, we could show them that, there was 30 decks in BT15, but they could go, yeah, but the card game I came from, we only had 3 that were meta. So to me, 8 is still a lot. And you could argue, yes, 8 is a lot if you were to compare the previous game you were playing or some of the other current games that are out there. Yes, 8 does seem a lot, but comparing to just Digimon itself, we are starting to get very low. We're starting to get into the BT7 blue hybrid, yellow hybrid kind of diverse, like strict topping decks, so to say.
Yeah, it's definitely always weird and interesting. I think like part of a lot of players' frustration might not necessarily be the amount of decks. It like again, there's just so many different factors that go into this. It's kind of nuts. That like it's partially why it's hard to just pin down and nail down and find a concrete answer for it, because like if we look at color spread and representation, green is borderline almost non-existent at this point. Like green used to have a couple of good decks, like Grandis and Bloomlord as 2 of the more prominent examples. But like if you like actually stop and look and think about like, oh, what green decks have been doing well outside of literally Rapidmon, the answer has been really none. You could kind of say Bloomlord has like its moments here or there, but like the bigger problem is part of like the matchup spread and what counters what, because like just as an example, if I'm building a deck right this very moment to counter Mirage, I'm incidentally countering so many more decks that I'm not even thinking about because of what Mirage does. And by that, I'm saying Mirage gains memory. So, like, any deck that now has its game plan based around gaining memory is now getting hard countered by the fact that Mirage exists. And that's creating more binary matchup spreads, because I can say this for a fact, like, oh, countering Mirage also counters Bloomlord, just as an example. Stop them from playing Digimon by effects. Oh, cool. Mirage does that with Honkun, and Bloomlord does that with Agitar and Blossomon. So now because I countered Mirage, I also counter Bloomlord. Therefore, Bloomlord is less relevant of a deck now more than ever. And then, oh, Mirage is a mega level Digimon that gains memory. Well, Bloomlord's a mega level Digimon that also gains memory. So, like, you can kind of see, like, the reasons why certain things have just completely fallen off the meta is because of the checks and counters that we're trying to tech for when it comes to some of the better decks. And you could say that's it's very similar to some other like more tier 1 formats in the past, and that's partially why like we get only one or two tier 1 decks and then a handful of tier 2 decks is because of just how binary those types of counters and matchups are and what they're kind of countering. So,
Yeah, because even the idea of Leviathan, just what Leviathan wants to do in itself, it's like, oh, my big thing is keeping my Tamers and Digimon count low, so when my opponent goes wide, I could do X, Y, Z and stop them. So, like, already in that mindset, it's already stopping the Mirage, Fish Engine, Honkun Engine, whatever you want to call that. It's stopping Fenrir Lugumon. It stops Bloomlord, like you just said. D Brigade, because D Brigade likes to spread bodies, like, as small examples. And even Lord Imon, too.
yeah, and like partially this diversity is how we get these matchup spreads, but like part of the like I've said this before in a different episode, I don't exactly remember, but it feels like Digimon has actually hit like its ceiling or max on the amount of playstyles and strategies that are allowed to exist because of the decks that we currently have in the format, which is why we need more constant bans and restrictions is to I hate to use the word pseudo rotate, but to allow other decks to be more viable. So, like, just as an example, because Mirage exists and because we're playing the counters we're playing exist, various other decks just aren't allowed to exist as a result. And I feel like Leviamon and the decks that it's trying to check is in the same type of a camp where it's creating these decks based on the mechanics that they're working with that are going to be way stronger than they reasonably should. And I feel like Demon Lords is kind of in that same camp where it's just like, okay, I'm probably just going to be the best, if not one of the best control decks in the entire game, fundamentally because of the like specific cards that I'm going to be using. Yes, I could say that Lucimon's kind of annoying, but part of the problem also lies in Biting Crush and Levia and how those two cards are interacting with each other. So it's just like, okay, that's a big part to how Demon Lords is playing, and that's also why Ruin Mode is like an insanely strong card as well. It's just like you're creating this like batch of like evergreen control cards, and because of that, it's limiting the viability of other cards existing because of their poor game design. Um, and like that in lies limits the amount of diversity that we're able to have when it comes to mechanical aspects, because now they're running into issues where they can't design specific things because other things already exist. And I think like they don't even acknowledge some of these problems yet because they probably haven't given it that much thought, to be honest. Like it's
Yeah,
easier to sit here and think about the problems in post, but I know that they're always working on new stuff. So it's harder for them to think backwards than forwards.
and that one could even also be the idea of the mindset of the region, because I mean, I'm pretty sure I've said this before. JP, like Japan, they're always willing to play. They want to forget the old stuff, play the new stuff. They have like the new stuff mentality. But here in America, we're more of, I don't care if this is a new deck, like Tyrannomon and EX8. It doesn't do anything when I could just keep playing, say, Mirage, for example. Because Mirage literally outs Fortitude. there's nothing Tyrannomon does to the current meta. So why would I spend all my money on this new thing when I could just save my money and either one, invest in other TCGs, invest in other things, or even just upgrade the rarity of some of my cards.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with this. So like I know we started the conversation on diversity, but we could see just how deep this well goes and how like deep the problems become rooted, like just stopping and thinking more objectively about like how do we define certain things and how did we end up in the way that we did in the situation that we did. um like it's really just curious, taking a breath and a step back and actually stopping and thinking critically on like where and how we got to this position. Because I do think like cards like Magnamon X Antibody, yes, there are technically answers, but that doesn't stop the card from being incredibly broken. And because that card exists, it starts to limit the diversity of strategies that are even able to be played. And it's really up to the meta dynamics on that rock paper scissors to really see what's playable at any given moment. And like you'll ask any Levia player and they'll say like, yeah, Magnamon is usually a really hard matchup unless I'm running X, Y, or Z. Just as an example. So
Well, I think it also is like just like the whole idea of, oh, Magnamon X does have counters. It's like that
yeah,
may be, but also that depends if the counters are like say Raid War Greymon as example. That's even if those decks are even meta reliant. Because in order for those to be meta reliant, that means Magnamon X needs to be consistently winning. Now, granted, before in the past, it was consistently winning, but the mindset has kind of shifted to be a lot more turbo of, as example, take Purple Hybrid. It's all about be aggressive fast. Like, I don't care if I'm checking for security, I have an alternate win con. Or even Mirage, where it just doesn't care if Mirage is out because it's doing the whole, oh, I can't be redirected, so I don't care if you have that
yeah, like
anymore.
that's why Numemon was so good, is because at that time Magnamon was the deck that you had to beat, and Numemon had one of the best answers at that time frame in order to actually beat it consistently with. And that's why like Numemon was the boogeyman. It was because it like a lot of decks were trying to figure out how to beat Magnamon because of how good that card was, but Numemon just already had that built into it. Um, which is again why it made Numemon as strong as it did. Granted, there was a lot of other factors that made Numemon kind of like stupid, mostly the Ukamons, and the fact that your level 4 dies and you get to play a level 6, that was also kind of dumb. So like there were other very dumb and stupid decisions that went into how that deck was constructed and why it turned out the way that it did. But I'm just saying, like from a more meta perspective, like it's when it comes to meta and diversity, it's all about checks and balances. And the way that the meta currently has shaped up is because of the high levels of power that we're currently working under and the immunities that are coming out. Like D-Digivolve honestly is the best form of soft removal in the entire game because no other line of text except for this Digimon is unaffected by Digimon effect, or like unaffected by your opponent's effects, period. Like that's the only line of text in the entire game that D-Digivolve basically doesn't work on. And that's crazy because like you could say, oh, it can have protection from Digimon effects. Well, you could still D-Digivolve it with options then. um but because of the high threshold that we're working under, like it really is forcing these silver bullets to actually be golden bullets, like one step above that, to where it's like, yes, this is solving the specific problem that I'm looking at, but it also incidentally, like I said earlier and alluded to, is outing everything else in the entire game that falls under this type of category. And I think like that's starting to be highly problematic, but like unfortunately that's just where the current state of the game is when it comes to its overall power level. It's like, yeah, Gazimon outs the Dog Engine, which also outs Mirage, which also outs Plants, which also outs like it. You get this like universal god answer that now decks are forced to run. So like the one thing looking at the top 32 breakdown when it comes to Mirage, none of the 7 Mirage decks in top 32 are Galaxy. I can tell you very specifically the reason why none of them are Galaxy. And
because they
that's
don't have the floodgates.
correct. None of them are running Floodgates, but other decks are running Floodgates, not even specifically for them. So, like, if I'm a Mirage player, just as an example, which I am, um, I'm playing Betamon, like Madoki Betamon, to out the Dog Engine. But because I'm running Madoki Betamon, I also just happen to out the Mirror, and I out the Galaxy Engine that much harder because that's mostly what they're hardcore relying on. So now I'm turning off like a greater number of things as a result. So I think like the floodgates that we have, like I think they're incredibly important, almost to the fact that they're too important. And like I don't know if exactly that's a problem or or what.
I don't know if they're really that much of a problem because, I mean, I think the only floodgate you can maybe argue might have been a problem at the time was Chumon, because there is technically the Edelmon deck that kind of revolves around the name Chumon,
I don't even
but
think that because you have Terriermon as well.
yeah, and Terriermon. I should also say Terriermon too. But it's like when you have like the floodgates that meet the specific name criteria, as example, like a Terriermon and Chumon, but I'll say Terriermon because that's a lot more relevant. Like because of the whole Henry, Willis, and even the Double Typhoon option card. It's like relying on namesake to play Terriermon for free, and it's like, well, this gives me a good reason to play the Floodgate Terriermon because it meets the name criteria.
Yeah, I mean, certain floodgates are always going to be easier to run in specific decks than others. Like, blue having access to Kun is, like, actually kind of nuts because even if I have a dud rookie in my raising area, like, when I Kun and spit that card out, like, that's already kind of insane. The fact that I could just reuse it, and if I don't want to eat it up, I don't have to. Or even if I was going to evolve on top of it, half the time I just am evolving into a level 4 because I need that level 4's inheritable. So it's like, it just gives me way easier access to reuse my cards. And I think like that's partially why blue and purple are just doing absolute gangbusters in terms of numbers and deck representation when it comes to the color spread of where the game's at, is because they obviously are the most consistent colors in the entire game, having access at the most card draw, but they also have access at some of the best recursion, not only just from the trash, but from inside of your Digimon as well. Like, we've always kind of known purple was broken for that aspect. Like, part of the reason why they limited Apoclymon is because, like, oh, if you out an Apoclymon, all of the resources that was required to use Apoclymon go right back in the trash, so it's even easier using the second Apoclymon than the first Apoclymon. And that's still going to be always a problem with purple, is like, yeah, they live off of their trash, and we barely have any grave hate. And with the scrambles, I think we honestly need more grave hate, because the scrambles are, like, after playing them, they're kind of nuts. Like, they're actually kind of, like, pseudo-broken cards. Which is crazy to me. At first, I thought they were, like, more okay, but the more I played them, the more I kind of just... I'm like, these cards are, like, insane. But that's a different topic for a different time. But where was I going with this? Oh, yeah. But like we always knew that those two colors were just the most efficient, and now that they have access at like the most different color spread because of all of the two color Digimon and the sharing of abilities that they have, like it's very clear that blue and purple are just the most overtuned colors in the entire game. They both do everything every other color does, but better. And
Well,
I
I
think
think it's
that's
also
sad.
well, I think it's also because blue and purple have the best floodgates in the game. Like, take purple for example. It has Gazimon, it has Psychmon. Like, literally outs like it outs play cost reduction. So that in itself outs Demon Lords. Has Gazimon for the memory gain floodgate. That outs Mirage theoretically, quote unquote, or any other memory gain kind of deck. And then you have blue, which has Madoki Betamon. It has Okamon, which is those same exact two. It also has what's that shell clam
Siakamon.
looking Siakamon that reduces like you can't reduce Digivolution costs. Like, that's super good too, even now.
Yeah, technically red has all of the best floodgates because they have stop by playing Digimon by card effects, stop memory gain, stop Digivolution cost reduction, or like Digivolution reduction, and they also have stop memory gain. So like they literally have the golden package. But the problem then becomes is like, okay, reasonably when it comes to deck building and deck design, I only have enough space for like 4 to maybe 6 floodgate spots. Like, not total floodgates, but just extra rookies to try to dedicate to floodgates. Because you're going to always run 4 of your main rookie, like, when it comes to current deck design. But, like, it's getting to the point where it's like, we run 4 of the main rookie, and then we're filling the rest of our rookie slots with floodgates because they're just that important on trying to bring the game back to a more reasonable level, except it's not even being a reasonable level because now we're just floodgating each other out to playing the game slowly, or one person's accelerating way faster than the other, and then the game becomes unfair. Like, it's hitting this really weird dynamic on how important these floodgates are, which is partially why Mirage is so good, is because having a level 6 floodgate is kind of just hard to do sometimes. Which is why Demon Lords is so strong, is because you reasonably are not going to be able to out a mega level Digimon coming on the field every single turn that also has built-in removal to it. So I think like that was kind of like uh you could say Royal Knights was doing something similar, but their cards were just way less efficient than Demon Lords. Like, the removal was not nearly as good, and the cost reductions weren't nearly as good, and the end game arguably was better. In a weird way, it's like better but worse at the same time. I don't know. But Demon Lords just did everything that Royal Knights wanted to do but better, and like it's just really it's really weird just how we got here, where floodgates are just this important. Because even like I think purple hybrids is like using some floodgates too.
Yeah, like Gazimon and Psychmon and like, well, it depends on the purple hybrid you play, but like I know with mine, for example, it's like I run the 4 BT16 Ukamons, the 1 promo Ukamon, and then I literally have maybe 2 Gabumons from the ST16 Metal Garurumon Ace starter deck, and I think I just chucked 3 of both the Psych and the Gazimon that I just mentioned.
Yeah, and I know a lot of purple hybrid players also were running the BT17 Argamon as like some tamer hate and a tamer floodgate. So like it is just getting to the point where these floodgates are just actually that important, and now decks are going to start to be designed around the idea of what floodgates do they A need to out and B need to run. Because part of the reason why Mirage is like partially really good is the fact that he has a built-in way to deal with his floodgates. Granted, if the opponent has 2 to 3 floodgates on the field, then you're kind of in some hot water, but at least 2 of them, it's still doable to out because you have the level 4, a potential level 5, and a level 6 all to get rid of rookies, which is why I like the floodgates being on the rookie level. But at the same time, the fact that we just have to run them is starting to get really obnoxious. Because you also have like red hybrids that is forced to run floodgates, and you're really starting to see, like, actually thinking about it, you're really starting to see this spread in like playable decks based on floodgates. Like, honestly, maybe that's like just where this direction of the meta has been headed all along, was like what floodgates are viable and what colors are able to beat out specific strategies. Like that, literally, Three Great Angels is only in here because Mirage is good. I don't think Three Great Angels is that good into the purple decks, which is why it didn't top as much as it did, is because there was a lot of purple decks that also have just as good, if not better, answers for Mirage than Three Great Angels. So, like, I don't know. I think like floodgates are becoming like this extra important thing.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is like people have also kind of stopped because let's take BT5 for example. Back in BT5, you would run a certain amount of things. You would run so many tamers, level threes, fours, fives, six, but you would always make sure you had at least, for example, two Gaia forces in your deck because you need option cards to out big bodies and everything. We kind of been seeing like the sacrifice of option cards have just been oh, your option cards need to be just the key relying pieces of consistency now. It needs to be the training cards, it needs to be the memory boost, it needs to be the scramble cards now. And it's like, which is why it's like it's not as big of a threat. Like, because imagine if Mirage was going against a deck that had security option removals, like Gaia Force or Seventh Great Heavens and everything. It's like I don't care about your jamming at all because my security actually has a chance to out you at least. But we've kind of stepped away from that idea, and we've been relying on the level threes to be the outs now.
Yeah, it is really weird thinking about just how the game has developed overall, and like that's partially why a lot of these like hyper fast OTK decks are able to be this good, is because security overall has gotten weaker to the point where I'm not that afraid of hitting the security unless it's very specific decks, because I only know very specific decks are able to even run removal options. So like Seven Great Demon Lords, Leviamon, Purple Hybrids, those are all purple decks that can run removal options. Like if I pull up a random Three Great Angels list, which I'm about to do, I'll see that where are their options? Emissary of Hope, Memory Boost, Trainings, and Scrambles. Like they're all accelerants, and like I get it, it's usually better to run accelerants to make sure your game plan is going to be as effective as possible, but at the same time what you're doing is then creating basically this arms race to where if I'm running accelerants and you're running accelerants, then we're just both trying to race to see who gets to the finish first. And there's no real deterrent for trying to like hit as hard as possible outside of, if I can't kill the opponent in a single go, then usually it's best for me not to attack because of the resources I would be giving the opponent. And this goes like the same for a lot of decks, which is why like you'll see a lot of Three Great Angels players just not attack period, and they'll just sit on their ever growing board and hope you can't out it, and then they just find a turn to basically turn all of their cards sideways so that way they can actually close the game. Because they don't have any multi-attack shenanigans. The best they have is Cherubimon with Alliance to hit for 2 checks. That's it. And any smart player at this point knows just not to attack security because, one, options aren't going to be a threat. So there's no need to, like, rush it in a way. Like, because the crackback could be so much greater because you could accidentally hit an accelerant for the opponent. So it's, and that's again partially why these OTK decks are like the most uninteractive decks we have, are doing as well as they are, is because one, you can't do anything about it, and two, they just need to wait long enough to be able to deal a lot of damage in a single turn, and then that's the game. Or just out their main stack and hope they don't have any accelerants to be able to rebuild. That's the other like nuance to it. But yeah, no, the meta is in a really weird spot. After playing in nationals, getting top 64 because I did end up getting 51st. I I have very mixed feelings about this format. Like it's not that bad. Like it's not as bad as I was thinking, but in I can't necessarily say I was having fun. Like that's the weird part. It's just like for me nationals was more about the people than it was about the actual game. And the people made the game way more enjoyable than the game actually was because looking at like my matchup spread, it was a lot of 2-0s. Like I think out of the 9 rounds I only had 2 of them that were 3 games that actually went to that game 3, but the majority of them were just blowouts. And I think a lot of other people probably had it similar where it's just like, yeah, the majority of these games based on matchup is literally just blowouts. Um, and that wasn't necessarily super fun or exciting. I mean, even me winning, it wasn't necessarily super fun or exciting. It's just like, yeah, I did my thing. I stopped you from doing your thing, and the game was just over. And I was just like, wow. If anything, it felt more frustrating than anything. But it's not like I can sit here and say after playing the event and doing well that it was that bad. It just wasn't that enjoyable. So I know we've been yapping for quite a bit. We'll probably cover spoilers next week. On top of like looking at the big picture, like a bigger picture, and what else? I know those are two things we're definitely going to be doing next week. Is covering the spoilers. I think we should have almost the entire EX8 set spoil or not EX8. BT20 spoiled by then.
Yeah,
So
because
we,
I think we're just waiting on some secret rares at this point now.
yeah, it's like a couple of cleanup cards and some secret rares. So we'll be able to talk about so oh yeah, we'll talk next week obviously about the BT20 spoilers and our overall thoughts and impressions on them. Then we got EX8 to cover because that's literally the set that's coming out this weekend. So obviously getting our thoughts out on it is going to be good. It's just I felt like nationals and having this discussion about diversity and where the meta got and how we got here was a little bit more important than EX8 because
Yeah,
that
because I know some people are already starting to get their thoughts out, like Mario's Gaming World. I think literally the day after Nats, he made his own video of what cards he wants to see on a banner restriction list based off of what Nats was, as example.
yeah, and we already covered that earlier, and I still stand by our list. Like even after playing Nats, I don't think there's anything that I really would change. If anything, I would probably add more. Um, but yeah, outside of adding more, I think that our list was pretty solid. His list kind of echoed like a lot of the community when it comes to the ban and restriction list. We're echoing the same things. It's just how much does Bandai want to take action on is the real question. But I felt like just having this type of conversation was more important than talking about EX8. But next week, we'll definitely be talking about EX8. We'll be talking about BT20 spoilers, and we'll probably talk a little bit about the big picture of the Nats format or the 2.0 environment because we'll actually have that data like more concrete after I run the numbers to be able to look at it. But we're not going to go too deep into it because we kind of the format's over and we kind of already know where it's at. So that'll be like the meta portion because we don't have any competitive events until next season. When it comes to big competitive events.
Yeah, and by then, 2.0 would already be cycled out. I think by that point, I think it's
No,
2.5/EX8.
Uh, our next string of events probably isn't until April because March is Worlds.
Oh,
So
March is never mind.
yeah, so it might even be like BT21 would be like the next actual competitive environment, which is crazy. Because 2.5 comes out in February.
Hmm.
March we don't get anything, so it literally, yeah, like April would be when the next season starts up, and by then it would be either 2.5 um or it would be BT21. Crazy. So yeah, I think this was definitely an interesting topic. Do you have any final thoughts, Jay Stewart?
Uh, yeah, just uh, I know I wasn't able to go there. I know some people in my KC area was able to go. So to anybody who did go, hopefully you still did have fun because it sounded like they did have a lot of events going on. It sounded like they were doing some side events where it sounded like people got some prize cards, if I remember correctly, from doing that. Like a three-man team versus so on and so forth. And first place got, I think, a top 32 card, maybe, or something.
Yeah, they
Could
got
be wrong.
like the championship packs.
Yeah. And then even the whole, there was like people able to play test like the new card games coming out, like the Gundam TCG.
Nobody
Um,
really tested that. That was kind of a shit show, but that's to be expected.
no, that I mean, I'm not. It's like part of me is surprised, but not surprised at the same time because I know for me, like the best thing about Gundam is doing the whole model kit building. Which, funny enough, I know Bandai did announce, oh, we're doing our own war game, Warhammer tabletop game now for Gundam, and I'm just thinking, well, couldn't I do that with the model kits? Like, just take your rules and just do that with the model kits already.
I mean, it's a little bit different, but yeah, it's in like Nats was ran okay. There were a couple of hiccups, like side events on Saturday. I think was kind of messed up a little bit because uh like General Pass couldn't pre-register. So they couldn't come in on Friday to get their badges and whatnot. Only competitors could. So that put a delay on side events, which kind of sucked for them. The Gundam demo was a raffle. Um, so you just had to hope and pray that you got in. I didn't, and you were only allowed to enter once. So it's not like because I failed a raffle, I could just enter in the next time slot. It's like, no, you're only literally able to enter one. And then that was it.
Yeah,
And
you would think Bandai would want to encourage as many people as possible to play their new
well, they just didn't have
uh
enough products. Like that's plain and simple. They didn't have enough products. They knew they weren't going to, and they probably did that on purpose just to try to keep the beta more exclusive. But the weird thing is, they open up the booster box that they give you, like the beta box, so that way scalpers can't just resell it as sealed. Because my shop wanted to buy it off me if I got in, and I said, like, hey, I didn't get in, and then somebody offered me their kit, and I was just like, oh, let me see if my shop wants it. And I mentioned it wasn't sealed, and he's just like, nope, that's the deal breaker. Not that my shop was trying to resell it, but like he wanted a fresh experience.
yeah, I can't blame them on that. Because I mean, uh when Digimon first came out and everything, like trying to get the whole promo cards, like BT4 for example, trying to get that update pack. There was like people whispers, I guess you could say, not trying to spread rumors or anything, but it was just at that time people were saying, "Oh yeah, there's people scalping this product out. Like you can't get this product without like you can't get that update pack at all at these locals." They're saying they didn't get it at all. And then you see the set same locals selling it on TCG Player.
Yeah, I think Bandai learned that dash packs was not the way to do it. It
But
was a
yeah, and
good
like
attempt.
obviously But like obviously like Bandai's kind of learned their lesson for Digimon, and it's kind of now the whole it's sealed in the box. So just having something unsealed, you're just now running the risk of, ooh, am I excuse me, sorry. Am I going to be missing something now that should have been in there?
Yeah. But overall, Nats was like ran actually pretty well. There was plenty of interesting stuff to do. The scavenger hunt was, I think, this was probably one of their better scavenger hunts compared to some of the previous ones that they did. Like it was just a very clean event. I will say that. So anyone who did go probably knows for the most part, outside of a couple of hiccups, it was pretty well put together.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised they didn't do any kind of announcement of any kind like they did how last year. Because last year they announced Liber. I'm pretty sure they announced Liberators last year on Nats.
Yeah,
If, so, but
they
like
did.
this one, they kind of repeated what they announced at the last DigiCon, or right? Yeah,
Card Fest.
yeah, Cardfest.
Yeah, I mean, down to the concert having basically the same like musicians. Um, I think like their big thing was the showing the movie if you were not playing in the event. I wanted to see the movie, but it was the re-edited dub of the first Digimon movie. So, but it is what it is. The event was pretty good overall. Pretty satisfied with my performance, and most people seem to be pretty happy about how it was ran. But yeah, so any other final thoughts? I know I kind of interrupted your final thought already.
No, I mean that was it. I mean, because I did try watching the live stream of it, and I think I only got to see like two matches, which is what I stated earlier. So
Yeah, it was Galacti and Mirage, not versus each other. I think like that was a big misplay on their part was the Mirage Silent Mirror match. I think that was not good. And then there was always the funny oopsies towards the end where the announcer for Digimon accidentally misspoke and he said Pokemon for the Pokemon finals. That was pretty funny. Sad but funny. So,
yeah,
uh,
I mean the only other yeah, no, I'm not even gonna mention that. But yeah, I mean, it looked like it was a fun experience. I just wish I could have gone. I could have gone as a spectator, but I wanted to go and play too. So
yeah, it makes me still want to maybe try to compete just to get in, but my sentiment, along with the majority of the communities, is I'm just literally waiting and seeing if the game is going to get better. Not necessarily from a set perspective, but from a design perspective. Because I think the themes for the Digimon sets have always been pretty fire. Like, they pick really good themes and really fun Digimon. It's just design wise, they've kind of just been breaking the game in half since the EX5. So I just I'm just waiting to see if one they stop and two if they don't stop if they could at least ban and restrict things to kind of fix it and three how bad do things actually get because I know people like I'm not saying the game is anywhere near close to dying it's not but
it
uh
just needs a really good ban and restriction list to, I think, give people a breath of fresh air, a chance to
exactly
breathe again.
exactly because right now this meta feels just very suffocating and I'll say that as somebody who's been playing in like all of this meta. Somebody who's competed at Nats, this meta is it's excruciatingly suffocating. But yeah, so I think that's a good place to stop. So I want to thank everyone for listening all the way to the very end. It really does mean the world to us that you can listen to two guys yap for this long. So I want to thank all of you for listening slash watching, and we hope to see you in the next episode. Later.